Pass on what you have learned.
From a galaxy far, far away, this is the Generations of Star Wars podcast.
This is the Generations of Star Wars podcast. I am Scott.
And I am Dante.
Welcome to episode 2 of Go Star Wars. And here we go. We are well into 2017. And Dante, I'm glad you could squeeze this in between robotics and your film shoot. Talk to us a little bit about both your projects. You got 2 projects as a thriving high schooler, college student / college student. What's going on? What are you trying to wedge this podcast in between?
Well, I'm a sophomore in college while being a senior in high school. So that's quite the balance.
Yep.
Doing dual enrollment classes at school. So I've decided to pursue right now a major in communications media at the school I'm going to right now.
Yep.
And so that's part of the film aspect of it, is just pursuing a degree in media there with a focus on the film aspect of it. And through robotics, that was kind of a passion that I had a while ago. And it's something that I'm the co-president of the team now, so I'm just still helping with that while also going into the things that I am at school.
Great. Awesome. So we can be found on Facebook. Look up Go Star Wars, on Twitter at Go Star Wars, and on Instagram
At Go Star Wars 2016.
Great. All right. So we have a little sweet spot of time here. Let's get into this. So, Dante, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to be Luke Skywalker, I think. And what I mean is, at the end of this year, when episode 8 comes out, I think I'm growing my hair, my wily mane, and my facial muck. I'm going to grow out so that I can look like a homeless Jedi.
That's going to be interesting, especially since your hair is super curly. You're going to have to flatten it.
I can make that work. I can use, wet hair with a blow dryer and hairspray and gel, and I can tame that thing down.
I think it'd be fun. You pulled off a really good Krennic, and a lot of people said that too. It was a pretty good Krennic, so
I think I have a higher calling this year to pull this off. And I mean, there's
bigger
the calling.
name character.
There's a calling to feed you and your siblings. That's up there. I want to do that for you.
I hope so.
Good. And I want to feed our dog, Django.
That's good.
That's good too. But right there, just minuscule little amounts below that is this calling. And I believe that I am called to do this. And your mother is going to help because she made the Krennic costume. Why can't she did it once. Why couldn't she do it again?
And she has a whole year this time.
Right. She has plenty of time. So I think this is pretty much a done deal. It's a matter of hair growth and fabric acquisition and a lot of nights with your mother being a little bit cranky on why she has to figure out how to pull off a pattern that doesn't exist. But, that's her problem. So we won't worry about that until such a time as we have to confront it. But that's more on me. On to news. So Woody Harrelson has been confirmed for the Han Solo standalone movie. Woody Harrelson, as you all know, has been a very accomplished actor. He's been a part of over 70 film projects.
He has a big part in Hunger Games.
Yes. Let me get to that. Over 70 film projects, plus over 10 well, let's say with the film projects, he's been nominated for an Academy Award as well as for an Emmy, and then he's been a part of over 10 TV projects, not the least of which is Will and Grace, and then also a long run with the Cheers television series, which ran from the mid 80s to the mid 90s, and he was on that pretty much through the entire run. And also he has written and directed. He has just a resume that speaks for itself. But all that aside, that's on paper. You just watch the guy, and he has the ability to deliver a line. It falls out of him. It's effortless. And most recently, and your connection to him, you just mentioned, was
the Hunger Games.
And that was his character of Abernathy, right? Is that the character's name? Hamish Abernathy.
Hamish, there it is.
Hamish Abernathy. And he was a mentor there.
A drunk mentor. It was quite fun.
I hope... I watched scenes as you were watching those.
You kind of jumped in and out.
Yeah, I've never questioned his ability. So when I saw those scenes, I didn't think anything of it. I thought, okay, it's Woody Harrelson. He's an ace. You know, I never at that time thought he would be connected to Star Wars. I didn't think specifically he wouldn't be, but you know, I just don't. I hope they don't recreate the same mentor role for him in Star Wars.
And I think that it will be a different role. And I feel like he's still going to be kind of like the scumbaggish mentor, if that makes sense, because Han Solo he's the smuggler, he's the scoundrel. He's the kind of guy that, you know, he's rough around the edges, and I feel like his mentor is going to be that. And I think we basically can agree that Woody Harrelson's character is going to be the mentor for Han Solo, or at least some kind of mentor role, even if it's not a full-on like Obi-Wan Kenobi to Luke Skywalker. He's going to have some kind of influence on Han, and I feel like that will be his role in the film. And I feel like that's a role that he fits in well in. Again, referencing Hunger Games, he did a fantastic job being a drunk mentor, like a washed-up mentor. So a washed-up smuggler might be interesting. And I think there will be correlations, but I don't think it'll be the exact same character.
Yeah, I just hope that he's more... I'd like to see him just... not so much the drunk, but more just the... I like when Han, for instance, in Episode 7, I never asked that question until I've tried it.
So he kind of has that attitude.
Yeah, just
Woody Harrelson does.
It's just go. I don't care. There's no plan. Just go. I'd like to see that come from Woody. I could just see him pulling that off more. If they make him a repeat of the character he was in Hunger Games, it's just I wouldn't like that as much.
I think they'll do it right.
I trust that they will. Again, I use Lego Movie, and I just know that they nailed that so perfectly. And I think that the humor that they pull into this film for the Han Solo character, and with Lawrence Kasdan being a part of it.
He is. I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's going to be doing the
screenplay.
The screenplay.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's the one project that he tapped when they were laying everything out. That's what I heard. Originally, it was that they laid everything out.
He's like, I want to be on Han Solo.
Yeah, exactly. So,
all right, I'm down for that.
I think it's all set up to be really, just the way we want it to be. One thing I want to talk about before we get into Rebels, Star Wars 7x7, Alan Voivod. Episode 931, this is last Friday's episode, was about the hero's journey, and specifically in how the hero's journey relates to Rogue One. And we don't normally go out of our way to just talk about other podcasts, but in this case, I think it's a really good a way for us to say you should listen to this, because and how it relates to our podcast, we're trying to delve deeper into mythology as it relates to Star Wars. And here Alan really lays this out, the hero's journey, in a very succinct way, very consolidated way, but it's also thorough enough to detail all the points of the hero's journey, how it relates to Rogue One and corollary to A New Hope. And so we would recommend that all of you listen to that episode. And what's great about Star Wars 7x7, and just look it up on iTunes, Star Wars 7x7, is that it's a daily, every single day, it's a Star Wars podcast that comes out, and it's about a minimum of 7 minutes long. It's always longer by fractions of a minute or a few minutes. And you get Star Wars every day. So that's what's awesome. But in this case, he's talking about the hero's journey. Please check that out. It's episode 931 for him. It's last Friday's episode.
And I would say that listening to it, there are a very few minute things that I would disagree with him on. For example, the mentor character in Rogue One, I would say, is a different character than he mentions. But overall, he does a very good job of breaking down the hero's journey for Jyn, specifically in Rogue One, and comparing that to Luke's in Episode 4.
And with that, we will jump to Rebels. So, Rebels, this week's episode is centered around Sabine and her encounter with the Darksaber. Back in the episode of Visions and Voices, they recovered the Darksaber. It was from, they recovered it, had recovered it from Maul's planet, which is, Maul's planet's, what's the name of it?
Dathomir.
Dathomir, thank you. And he had this little sacred shrine in the recesses of a cavern, and his sisters had this altar, and somewhere in that cavern, when he took, earlier in the season, he had taken Ezra. Ezra had seen the lightsaber, and he had tried to really, that was the point where he really tried to take Ezra on as his apprentice finally, and at the end of the episode, he was very upset that Ezra wouldn't follow along. But at the end of the episode, they had recovered the Darksaber, and then in this episode, they are encouraging Sabine to take on the mantle of being the leader in reuniting her home, her family clan in Mandalore.
Yeah, I really like this episode a lot. The Trials, called Trials of the Darksaber. And it's interesting because Maul has had this thing for a very long time. He's had it since he ruled Mandalore in Season 5 of the Clone Wars, which, in the timeline, is a solid, it's under 20 years, but it's got to be somewhere around 15. So he's had this thing for a while. But just going off of the fact that there's roughly 20 years between 3 and 4, and then Rebels is about 1 year out from Rogue One now, 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So roughly around 15 to
1.5 to 2 years.
15 to 18 years, given that Luke is 20-ish. So he's had this thing for a while. It's been sitting there, and he has this whole room of his trophies almost. And he kind of gives his own pedestal to that because he literally ruled a planet, and it was very impactful for the Vizsla house and for everything. So I like that aspect of the episode and just the weight that's given to it because of things that we've seen before and the history that's written on the wall in the very beginning of the episode, where he's like, there was a
That part I
Mandalorian Jedi.
loved. I love that part. I thought that the history on the cave wall and the way they animated it,
The animation was beautiful for that scene.
That was
It gave it an historic feel.
that was very Disney. It was something that it struck me as something they either would have done or have done. Animation was very, it was enigmatic. It looked a little bit like cave drawings and paintings, and it just felt like it had a gravitas to it that wouldn't normally be there. And I think the animation did it. It sold that, and the voice acting was adequate enough to get through that scene.
Yeah, Fen Rao, that's his name.
Okay, thank you for that. I think again the animation really drove that scene. The history was beautifully conveyed.
Just delving into that history a little bit, though, that's one of the reasons that this episode probably is one of my favorites of the season so far. It's up there with the last Thrawn episode and the Visions and Voices because of the weight that this is given with the history and some of the things that I'm not entirely sure if they've confirmed them before, but they kind of reinforced that some of the things from the old canon are being brought into the new canon. For example, the Mandalorian Jedi War, which they reveal later, and the forms with the lightsaber also, which again is later on. But I love the weight that's given to this with the history because there's a Mandalorian Jedi, which I feel like a lot of people are going to be very polar about. It's going to be either you like the idea or you don't want a Mandalorian to be a Jedi at all.
Originally, a Mandalorian Jedi with Tar Vizsla.
Yeah.
Originally, and then after that.
After that, they kind of like no. There was one Mandalorian Jedi that we know of, which is an awesome combo. But then they took his lightsaber and they used it to conquer their world, which is very much the Vizsla way, having seen them a lot in Clone Wars.
And as that visual homage to the history portrayed, it was very much like literally the animation showed the saber in like a stone, like
in the
Arthur.
temple.
Right, in the Jedi temple, like Arthur. And they really went out of their way, and they even had him, the one pulling the saber out, with soldiers on either side. It was very aggressively Arthurian. Like, it wasn't even trying to pretend. It was extremely Arthurian. So they showed that I think they were trying to. They may have gone a little too far even, but just to show. But I'm not upset about that. I think they were trying to show this blade matters. It's so unique. You have to take it.
It is the Excalibur of the Star Wars universe for Mandalore.
Exactly.
It has such weight to it, and I really want to know what crystal is inside of that thing. Like, that blade is out there. I really want to know where he got that. But so the history there was so rich, and I'll talk more about the history later when we get into the later half of the episode. But it's the history that's confirmed as coming back into canon, and the history that's revealed is just so rich. And the fact that I love The Mandalorian so much is just one of the reasons that it's in probably my top 3 so far this season.
I think what didn't work for me, and this is, we talked about this, like, that I didn't quite like it as much as you did. And,
yeah.
So I've had time to think about this, and I think that what I don't like is this really consolidated, shrunken, and in each scene it was fine, but this shrunken amount of training, I don't feel like it really gives enough weight for Sabine. Like, I think they did a good job. They did the best they could in a half-hour episode, this would have been much better. Had this been the midway point between season 1, the first half of season 2, the first half of season 3, and beginnings the second half of season 3, that would have been a wonderful 2-part episode.
Kind of like Geonosis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like specifically about the training though, they do reference that it's been like a solid like week or two that she's been constantly training.
It's not the time. It's selling it to me. I'm not buying it.
I liked it personally. I liked it a lot, and
just when they had a Bendu cameo,
I was disappointed by that. I was disappointed by that. Well, before we get to Bendu, just talking about the first bit where they go out and they start training. One thing that they talked about in Rebels Recon when they were interviewing Filoni for this episode, which is rare that Filoni actually gets an interview with Recon anymore, except on like important episodes. He mentioned that they recorded the lines for this before they animated it, which is actually really rare because normally they would animate it and then record. But he actually had the actress that plays Sabine record her lines, and I think everyone else's too, but mainly her lines beforehand because he wanted the emotion of the episode to ride on her, and so he wanted to form the episode around her emotion, which I thought was really powerful. And also, he mentions that it's a very self-contained episode, that there's no overarching plot except that, she's training. And I really liked that this is a very character-driven episode. That's probably another reason I really liked it, is very much character growth. And I love character growth episodes. And the fact that she's learning this, and it's focused on that. There's no like Empire's gonna attack the base or anything like that. Right. It's just she's just training. It's just that. That's it. And it's the emotion that she has, and it's also Kanan learning. And this is going on to another point, is that Kanan is not a teacher. He is a Jedi Knight, not a Jedi Master. And he had trouble with Ezra, but he's having even more trouble here because he's not a teacher, so he's learning how to teach as he's teaching these kids, and it's very difficult for him. And I loved that aspect was in this episode.
And in my mind, that was the best part of the episode.
And also, like, going on to later when he starts talking about the history, he's like, history lesson. We won the war with Mandalore. Again, confirming history.
Right.
He has this deep-seated, like, anger almost. Like, this is part of his history as a Jedi as well. So in this episode, you kind of have the two sides of that war from 1,000 years ago. You have the Mandalorian side, which is Sabine and House of Isla, and then you have the Jedi side, which is Kanan, and you kind of see them clash.
I don't think his anger is connected to the past. I think...
But it's also just the Mandalorian stereotype.
It's not apart from that. I just think he is... The reason he's wound up, and that's what I like about this episode, is like he's on edge. Is he's feeling the weight. He doesn't know that Obi-Wan's alive. He's feeling the weight of having Ezra under his tutelage, Sabine now under his tutelage, and that he himself is, those three, they're alive. They're able to affect what's coming. I think he feels squeezed. Like, I can identify in it. I mean, just totally different, like not related to the story that we're dealing with, but in a business standpoint, I've been squeezed before. I don't like that. I know what that feels like, being pinched and expected to do certain things and having limited assets available to me, and it's not comfortable at all. and so I can identify in that sense, and I like that was the best part of the episode. I think Kanan was the best part of the episode, not Ezra, not Sabine. They could have been like the way that the story unfolded and the way the training unfolded. I wish it was longer. It would have been a wonderful two-parter. But I loved Kanan. Like what they got out of Kanan, it was beautiful and what I would expect.
Yeah, and yeah, I would agree, but I think that I really liked Sabine in this. I love the dynamic between Sabine and Kanan. I love that Kanan's struggling as a teacher. I love that so much, but I love the character development in both of those characters. And Ezra is kind of like meh in this episode. He's like he says some things, and I'm just like, dude,
In the
just,
early
just
part,
don't talk.
I'm
Like even Sabine's like, I'll break you if you don't shut up. Like
the early
just
part of the
stop,
episode,
man.
I'm just like, shut up, Ezra.
You're not helping at all. But going on to the training, and
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to Kanan's comment about the war, but I love that. This was confirmed earlier in Rebels with the hologram of Anakin showing the forms, but I was really glad that they included the forms in this, and just kind of confirming that and keeping that in the lore, because I love the realism that gives. Like even having done karate for a while, forms are part of any fighting style because it gets you used to the motions, and then you can use it and mix it up for yourself, So I really liked that aspect of it, and the fact that the forms are included, it made me very, very happy, and that we got to see them, And the other bit that I really liked that was included was the war, and the fact that 1,000 years ago there was this Mandalorian Jedi,
Right.
and he died, and they took the sword and they started conquering, and then there was a war between the Jedi and the Mandalorians. I'm very, very glad that that's still canon, and
Right.
I want to see that at some
Agreed.
point. I really do. But also, I have a theory.
Okay.
I think that the what Obi-Wan speaks of for over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights have been guardians of the protectors of peace
Yes.
and prosperity in the galaxy. I think the peace started right after the Mandalorian Jedi War.
Okay.
I think that was the final war before the 1,000-year peace. And
Interesting.
I could be wrong, but it seems to line up very well. And I think that would be a very interesting twist, kind of like just throwing that in there.
Well, I've told you before, I would love them to go back and do the Old Republic. And
I want them to do that so
and
bad. I'm legitimately
move
curious.
into that part of the mythology.
I'm legitimately curious because I know that Filoni has taken kind of a backseat on Rebels because
Right.
they've said that he is heavily involved in developing the next
Series.
animated series.
Right.
I'm
What is it?
legitimately wondering if that's Old Republic because there's a
hope so.
very good chance that it is, because they could do an animated series between like 5 and 6 or something, or
Right.
even 1 and 2, but I don't think that it has
5 and
much
6
weight.
would
But
be bad.
it would be pretty bad, but it doesn't have much weight. There's a lot of weight for Clone Wars because of how much it's referenced, and there's a lot of weight for Rebels because you don't know what's going on with the rebellion and everything and all that it's building up in there. So I think that Old Republic is the next logical step in. There's this gap here, and we want to know what's going on.
The nice thing is, I think they're being pretty clear and declaring what they're doing in a lot of respects, in that they're doing comics between episodes 4 and 5. They're doing some comics between 6. They're not doing anything between 5 and 6 that I know of, but 6 and 7 they're doing books.
A lot.
Books and if he's developing a new series, I agree. I hope it's earlier, and there's fertile ground there, so it's not like they need to try to make up an excuse. It's there.
They have a lot to work off of the Old Republic games too. Like it's not like there's not content there to pull from. There is an entire, like, especially like this almost cult of people that love there's not cult of people that love it, but a lot of people love the Old Republic video games, and they have a lot of lore in them, and there's a lot of stuff that they can pull from to do a series.
I agree.
And so, kind of like closing out this episode, I was also happy that she got her gauntlets and just
The
another
veins,
part of
right.
her Mandalorian armor completion almost.
Right. That was kind of cool.
And
I would agree. I think that's cool.
I liked her emotional climax.
Yeah.
And I know I kind of get why Ezra was there, besides the fact that, Kanan's training her to fight with the lightsaber, but he was needed for that emotional point right before she meets Bendu.
Right.
And I liked her emotional climax. I was really glad that they gave her that and that she's a much deeper character now, and I'm very much excited for the next episode. And I'm very much angry that it's like a month away.
Yeah, it better be like really good. That next episode has to be like out of the ballpark because that's too long for anyone to wait. But so that being said, let's move on to the final segment of the show, and we're going to talk about Clone Wars, not the Clone Wars, but
Clone
quote
Wars.
unquote Clone Wars. Yep.
So, for simplicity's sake, right off the bat, I'm going to say that there are two Clone Warses. The one that was called Star Wars Clone Wars came out in 2003, created by Genndy Tartakovsky right after he was finishing up Samurai Jack. He was asked by Lucasfilm to come on to create a Star Wars microseries. The Clone Wars that Filoni made years later is called the Star Wars The Clone Wars. So we're going to refer to them as Clone Wars and The Clone Wars.
Right.
Clone Wars being Tartakovsky's and The Clone Wars being Filoni's.
Okay.
And so Tartakovsky agreed to come on, and at first Lucasfilm wanted them to be like 1 minute little mini episodes, and he agreed to come on as long as it was 3 to 5 episodes, or 35 minutes, sorry. 1 minute episodes, and Genndy wanted to be 3 to 5 minutes. And originally they had 20 episodes, and they had 2 seasons that were released on Cartoon Network and simultaneously released online.
Right.
And it makes sense that it was Cartoon Network because that's where the first few seasons of The Clone Wars were released as well years later. So Star Wars for a while was on Cartoon Network. And there were 20 episodes planned for the first 2 seasons, which actually comprise Volume 1, so it's a little confusing there. And then it was greenlit for a 3rd season based on the success of the first 2, which made up Volume 2, and those were 5 episodes of 15 minutes in length.
Right.
So it was a little different. Seasons 1 and 2, which comprise Volume 1, actually won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2004.
Right.
And Season 3 won it for 2005, the same award. So it's a very, very well-made series, just in general. And so we're going to dive into the first about 12 to 13 minutes of it, and it is available, obviously, on Amazon.
Right.
It is able to be found on YouTube as well.
Right.
There are a few cuts, although some of them have been taken down. So some pop up and come down, but usually you can find a copy on YouTube. But buy it to support the industry. So the opening, I want to talk about the opening a little bit. And you have the very, very opening where it's like sound effects of like blasters and everything while Star Wars comes up. So it's like crackling and it's like a
10
hologram.
minutes, you have Yoda igniting a lightsaber. Right?
Within the first few seconds, you have Yoda riding this weird goat thing. We're gonna call it a Star Wars goat.
It has like the sound of a tauntaun.
It's like so you see Yoda, and then he ignites his lightsaber and points it forward, and automatically it cuts out, and you see this army behind him.
Yes.
And then you see the enemy army, and immediately you're like, Clone Wars right off the bat. And then you have Yoda's monologue basically describing what's going on. Planets are falling in league with Count Dooku, and then there's this war. And something that Genndy does very well in this series is show the sense of scale. And we talked a lot about scale in our Rogue One review, but he shows the scale of war. Because literally there are hundreds of thousands of units on the screen almost every time you pan out to a wide shot. And it shows in little clips they show in the beginning during Yoda's monologue of different places that we get to see later more in more depth in the series. You see Mace Windu cutting down super battle droids. You see
Love that part.
you see Kit Fisto fighting underwater, which
The Aquaman of Star Wars.
We'll talk about that later. And then you just get this scale of, and even the grit too, because it cuts also to a shot of some clone troopers shooting in this mud planet, and like half of their boots is like caked in mud, and it's just the grit and the scale of war is shown very well.
Right.
And then right off the bat, he says, Yoda kind of says that, you know, there's Jedi warriors fighting this war, and it shows Episode 2 versions of Obi-Wan and Anakin. And immediately you start getting foreshadowing for Anakin's fall. Yeah. Like, because he cuts down 2 droids, and then he cuts up, and he has this look of pure anger as the light of the lightsaber is shining on the side of his face. And then it cuts to inside Palpatine's office, and Palpatine is automatically working his charm on Anakin. He's already working to get him, and Yoda and Obi-Wan do not like it.
Right.
He grants permission for Anakin to be the lead of the space attack army.
Space fleet.
And Yoda and Obi-Wan don't feel like he's particularly ready, but Yoda kind of says, I don't feel like he's ready, but he has become very strong. And he goes, perhaps. And then Palpatine jumps in. He's like, then it's decided. Right. So you know that Palpatine's he's working. He's already working. And it's very obvious that this is the Episode 2 Obi-Wan and Anakin, and you can see that dynamic too, because from Volume 1 to Volume 2, the dynamic between Obi-Wan and Anakin changes. And I want to talk about the dynamic between them in this, because it's very much Episode 2. They are just butting heads constantly, and Anakin does not like Obi-Wan trying to hold him back.
And again, this is irrespective of the Clone Wars.
Sadly.
You have to when you're hearing our analysis, and mainly Dante's analysis here, we're not talking about Filoni's Clone Wars, just
although we will compare.
Yeah, but now
near the end, I will compare.
When he's talking about Anakin's turn, only as it relates to Clone Wars by Genndy.
Yeah, and so one thing that I did like comparing it right now to the Clone Wars is the Clone Wars starts after Anakin's a knight, basically. He's lost his little like Padawan hair thing, and he's a what's like a side ponytail. He is a knight, and in this, the first little bit is almost right. It seems like maybe months after Episode 2. So he's still a Padawan, and you can see the dynamic there because he still feels like Obi-Wan's holding him back, and that irritates him. And Obi-Wan's kind of resigned to the fact, he's like, the decision has been made. May the Force be with you, Commander. And he's kind of throws some spite in there, like he doesn't like it, but
doing some mechanical work.
Yeah. Right. And I love the shot too. You see him in the reflection of like the tube that he's working on. Right. And then they start to fly off and get ready, and Anakin does this super over dramatic toss of his cloak,
which lands on 3PO.
And it's so like, people always wonder about the mysteries of the Force, but the real mystery that I'm wondering about is the cloaks. Like, whatever happens to the cloaks? They always lose them. And like, they have like some single tailor that Yoda calls up, and he's like, "Make more cloaks, I need you to." And he's like, what dude am I making for? He's like, Anakin. He's like, okay, all right, I'll get Anakin. It's like they got like some single tailor out there that they pay like 50 credits per cloak or something.
When I saw that today, I was rewatching it, and I thought, oh, it's a great way to segue away from 3PO. 3PO absorbs it, and it's like, okay, that's 3PO, whatever. And then
the droids do have a lesser role in this show.
And I think because there's less screen time, it's better. But then you have the ship rise up, and he waves to
Padme,
and then he's off on his mission.
Yeah. I seriously want to know what happens to the cloaks, though. Like, did they get new ones every time they drop them in, like, a Sith fight? Or I don't know, that's the real mystery of the Jedi, is what happens to their cloaks.
Nice.
But yeah, and then they fly off. And then Obi-Wan makes this comment. This is a little bit before I got a little out of order, but a little bit before he throws off his cloak super dramatically, Obi-Wan makes this comment, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on it. He says, "I doubt even Master Qui-Gon Jinn could have prepared a Jedi for this." And it's like kind of this vague comment that he makes kind of offhand. And Qui-Gon has a very interesting role in this series, which we'll get into more later when he appears in kind of like a vision in Volume 2. Or I think it's Volume 2. But he makes this comment kind of offhand, and it's like, what did he mean by it? I'm not entirely sure myself. Like, it could have meant that Qui-Gon was very much against war. He was very much like, we're keepers of the peace, not soldiers. And he was trying to keep what Mace was saying, whereas Mace went off and did the wrong thing. But we can only protect you. We cannot fight a war for you, to Padme. Right. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on that comment. It's very vague, kind of not really addressed, I don't think, and it's kind of just out there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've been one, and you know this. To say that I think that Qui-Gon in all the canon, like approved canon to this day, canon of Star Wars, I think Qui-Gon is like the quintessential Jedi.
Yes.
What the Jedi should be, not what they were. Obviously, they were agents of the dark side.
And so...
Go ahead.
Well, are you saying that, like, because of that, Qui-Gon was ill-prepared to prepare someone for war because he didn't feel that was the place of a Jedi?
Right. His students, anyone that he influenced would not have been prepared for war. They were prepared to listen to the Force in that moment, the living Force. You couldn't be any more current.
Yeah.
Than the living Force, and to act on that. And with that, I think that the downfall of the Jedi was the moment they became warriors, and they didn't get off that moment until they were exterminated. Like, it didn't stop. I
think also that might have played into Obi-Wan's training for Anakin, and that way Anakin was ill-prepared for war, and that might have played into his transformation too.
Definitely.
Just the fact that he was scarred by war, and Obi-Wan, he knows that this isn't what Jedi's supposed to be. And I think that comment might have been like, I can't prepare him for this. I'm not prepared, you know? So I feel like that's kind of what that is symbolizing.
And once you get to the end of episode 1, once Palpatine knows that there's this Anakin kid that blew up this Trade Federation ship.
A hub ship, yeah.
And he says in episode 1, we'll watch this career with whatever he says.
Great interest,
yeah. I'm gonna keep an eye on you.
Yeah.
He knew something was up, and obviously from that point, it's like once Anakin's on his radar, it's all over. So I would think that Qui-Gon was a purist. Like, I think he got it.
Yeah.
And no one else did, and so he was an outsider. And you even see that Obi-Wan has conflict in episode 1 to some degree.
Definitely.
And it's more drawn out afterwards. And had Obi-Wan, or rather Qui-Gon, lived on, I think it would have been totally different.
Yeah, and I think we'll have another chance to talk about Qui-Gon as we get into Volume 2, because he has a very important scene there too, especially affecting Anakin, and even later when Anakin has his main fight for Volume 1. But moving on, we go to the next little bit, and you see the ships coming out of the space battle. And one thing I really like is all these ships are coming out of the enemy ships. You know, there's the ships coming out of the Republic. Not Star Destroyers, but the equivalent of for the Republic. And then you have the enemy ships coming out of their ships, and they are like organized, coming towards each other, and then immediately when they meet, it's complete chaos. It's utter space dogfighting. I loved that. And I love the scale that it gives to it too. And in the first 12-ish minutes of the series, you don't really get too much space battle. You get little hints of it, but it'll become more important later after. But just having seen that, and I really like that it's space dogfighting. And so then we get all these gunships dropping down to the planet, like they're deploying everything down there. And you get the ARC Trooper scene. I love the ARC Trooper scene.
The ARC Troopers, I was just watching that today again, and
they're bosses.
No dialogue, like zero, and just the hand motions, and anyone can flip their arm around and point and like, but it's just how it's pulled off.
It shows a level of efficiency that only soldiers have, and. Right. I want to briefly compare this to The Clone Wars, because in The Clone Wars, they gave clones personality and depth, and it's something that I really appreciate about that series. This series treats this series, which is just Clone Wars, treats clones very much like they're treated in the movies, especially Episode 2, which is just soldiers. They're just flat soldiers, emotionless. They're there to get the job done. They're very much that's very much what they are in this series. And I love how like their ship gets hit and it cuts to inside and they're just standing there. Like their ship gets hit, it's going down hardcore, and they're just like, let's go, let's do it. Like this is a normal day for an ARC Trooper. And just I love the hand motions and the fact that they don't even need to speak. Like they can just motion to each other and they're good to go. And I just absolutely love that about them. And also, we're going to talk about like weird, funny cameos in Clone Wars, especially when we get to Shaggy. But they shoot at a little dragon thing, and it almost looks like Mushu from Mulan. They're like, "Get out of here!" And he like crawls away. But and then they take down the big gun, and it's amazing. Nice. And that's basically the end of the arcs for most of Volume 1. We'll get them again in Season 2, or Volume 2, but they're amazing. I love that so much. Just how hardcore soldier they are.
No doubt about it. Like I think that this, for being traditional animation with some computer animation for ship sequences, it was phenomenal. And this is when you were like a toddler. You were like tiny.
Yeah.
And
did you let me watch it?
Yeah. It was on, and I would watch it, and you'd be like, watching it, and that's a big part of how you came into Star Wars.
Again, the Clone Wars is a big part of me coming to Star Wars.
Yes,
both series,
the original Clone Wars, especially.
Both of them.
But I mean, like it was just, I was like, really, Star Wars, and it's not just movies. And I knew Episode 3 was coming out,
and I love that this came out before Episode 3. The lead up to that is fantastic, and the combining of it, and it added a level of weight to this too, because it was coming out before Episode 3, whereas the Clone Wars came out afterwards, so you already know what's going on, and they were building off of that. And I think there are elements in this series that Filoni pulls for his Clone Wars, but we'll talk more about that as we get more into it later. Not today, but in a future episode.
Well, thank you, Dante. This is a really good overview and a really good segue into Clone Wars. Not the Clone Wars, Clone Wars.
And then next time we'll get into the Kit Fisto Aquaman scene, and then we get two Sith proteges. We get Dirge, who was so far not in the new canon, and then we get Ventress, who is in the new canon.
Right.
So we'll kind of talk about that dynamic and the comparison there, and just go from there.
Yes, and Dante will also kind of let us know kind of more of the specifics of why Clone Wars could not be canon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially
as opposed to
from stuff that they've revealed.
Kind of the points of discontinuity. There's mainly one or two things I think that
They're
lead us
revealed in
there.
Celebration. Yeah,
Right.
I'll go back over that.
And so we can point those out. I would also point out that a lot of the music that you hear is literally John Williams just taken from
Not new composed music, just music from the trilogies.
existing music,
Mostly the prequels.
right? But the other composers that had been listed are James L. Venable and Paul Dinlatier. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Probably not. But
Dinlatier.
for what they did a fantastic
They did
job.
a great job. So James L. Venable and Paul Dinlatier, whatever. I can't pronounce it. Whatever.
Just Paul, James and Paul.
James and Paul.
Props to you guys.
They did a great job, like taking John Williams' music and then like adding little splashes here and there to make it flow. But do you have anything else, Dante?
I don't think so. I'm excited for your going forward.
Great. So with that, just remember, everyone listening to this,
Pass on what you have learned.
And that's a wrap.